endorsement.
Okay, that's not true. I don't mind. Is that Mr. Sakura?
I have no idea.
Yeah, he has.
Yes, sit down.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Sorry.
Mr. Sakura is here. Thank you.
I got
I'll go to wherever I'll have Saturday workout.
If you'll take your seats, we're going to start in 20 seconds.
Oh yeah, it is.
Thank you very much. We promised to start on time, and that's what we're going to do. It is 2:15. It is time for the discussion with the candidates for Henderson Mayor. I'd like to say that because of some scheduling conflicts, Mayor Hafen did his recording earlier, and Mr. Eddie Hamilton was up here as well. And so they did theirs earlier, and so today we were here with, from the left, Mr. Jerry Sakura, also Kyler Robinson, Rick Workman, and Joe Scala. And first of all, we're going to give 30 seconds for each candidate to introduce themselves as they see fit. And so we will start from the left with Mr. Sakura.
Thank you, Jerry Sakura. I've been a member of the Sun City Anthem community for about 2 years now in March. I have one advantage, I believe, to run for mayor of Henderson. I've lived in cities that are over 300 years old and some older in London. I was fortunate enough to be there as a senior vice president and owner of a company that was a forerunner for Whole Foods. I went to Columbia Graduate School. I've lived in Greenwich Village.
Thank you very much. That is 30 seconds. Now, Mr. Skyler Robinson.
It's Kyler.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kyler Robinson.
That's all right, Stephen. Thank you. My name's Kyler Robinson. I've been a resident of Henderson my entire life. Currently, I'm a student at UNLV. I'm married, have 3 kids, and I'll basically keep it at that.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Rick Workman.
Hi, my name is Rick Workman. I am a retired military member. I spent 20 years in the service, representing our country. I've been an educator for over 20 years, teaching at the university level, including at UNLV and several other universities. I am primarily working in the fields of forensic science and law enforcement now, and have been doing so in this valley for 19 years.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Joe Scala.
Hello, I'm Joe Scala, a resident of Henderson since 1996. I'm a design builder, and I also restore antique automobiles.
Thank you very much. Now, I just want to say, I'm not trying to be rude, but we do have a strict time schedule, and to be fair to all candidates, I will be cutting you off, and it's not because I don't like you. It's just because we're trying to stick to the rules and do it the right way. So thank you very much. The forum today, in today's discussion, is we have a panel. We have a panel of people that will ask questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to provide their answer, and we're going to follow that platform. And then if there's any kind of a rebuttal, please raise your hand. If there is any action in the panel to where you're talking and saying things amongst each other, we will give that fair opportunity for rebuttal. Okay. We're going to start with Mr. George Assad, a former Las Vegas Municipal Court judge. Mr. Assad.
Thank you, Steve. And I'd like to thank Mr. Workman and Mr. Sakura for your service to the country. We owe you a great debt of gratitude. My question is pretty straightforward. I just want your basic philosophy, and it'll apply to each of you, on the relationship between government and the workforce that works for government. There are some serious financial situations going on both federally, North Las Vegas, we just had those folks here, and Henderson obviously has to watch their budget as well. What is your position, and do you oppose or would you favor the continuing process that we have now vis-a-vis public sector employees, firemen, police, SEIU, other employees that work for city and state government? Do you believe they should be unionized? Do you favor that position, or do you think they should be, as the federal employees are, at-will employees?
Since that's to the entire panel, this time we will start with Mr. Sakura.
The city of Henderson, my motto is save beautiful Henderson for the future, starting right now. The city is approximately 53 years old, I believe, and I like to make the analogy of it being a man in his middle age. And we have to look forward to, like my age, 73. And I started my career in a very unusual way in an internment camp after Pearl Harbor. So by the time I was 6, I've seen a lot of this world, and I've been fortunate enough and blessed by living the American dream. And I can see the beauty of Henderson, and although there are many things that are that we need to look at carefully, but to answer your specific question, Las Vegas has the nicest balance between unions and
Thank you very much. Your time is up,
workers.
Mr. Sakura. Thank you. Now, Mr. Robinson.
I'll ask you guys to forgive me. I'm pretty straightforward in my answers. I'm not a huge union person. I know that they have their place. It is there to protect its people. I do believe that it's kind of gotten out of hand. Government has kind of been, I guess, very bloated, especially in the past probably 15 years. Unfortunately, things have been taken advantage of in the sense that, you know, the city can't even really do a whole lot without renegotiating contracts. I mean, to be honest, we're all people. I think everybody realizes the situation that the city is in, and, you know, for people not to be able to sit down and say, hey, we're really in trouble here. We need to start changing things, or else we're going to find ourselves in a very sticky situation, and put the taxpayers on the hook for, you know, bad decisions that have been made in the past. But my time's up, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Now, Mr. Workman.
I've been employed here in this valley for 19 years, and I have not been a member of the union. I didn't have, actually, I take it back, when I was at Las Vegas Metro, we were. In my current position, I am not and have not been for 12 years. However, I think, to answer your question, if I may, there are two parts to this. If you go back in the old days, when some of the reasons for unions was to protect employees, in many cases, that still is in effect today. In some cases, we need the protection, the leadership of unions and the representations to help the folks. On the other hand, we know that there are negotiations, and I believe that those negotiations need to be open and public. We have a large portion of the employees at the City of Henderson who are at will. I am one of those at will employees, and if you have any employee who has an issue or a whistleblower or something like that, we do have ethics laws, but they need some protection. So it's a little bit of both, if I may say that.
Thank you, Mr. Workman. Mr. Scala.
I agree with Mr. Robinson. I'm not a big advocate of the unions. They had their time, they had their place. I've run many companies that have been non-union. I do prevailing wage, and I've found that, you know, my guys that do prevailing wage also work outside of prevailing wage, and it's the same. It's the same. So I'm not a big advocate of the unions at all. I think that it's a burden that the city shouldn't have to you know, that the taxpayers shouldn't have to absorb.
Thank you very much. If you're finished, Miss Karen Steelman is our panelist with the next question.
Good afternoon, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today and allowing us to scrutinize you in public. In the interest of full transparency, I'd like to ask Mr. Joe Scala if he could give us more information about your felony conviction, how that's going to affect your race and service.
Wow.
You got that. That was 25 years ago. I was in Hollywood, hung out at a really popular restaurant, and I got infiltrated by the FBI. And quite simply, I made a phone call. My best friend, his uncle, dealt coke, and this FBI agent wanted to score coke, and that's what I did. I made a phone call 25 years ago. Did I learn a lesson? Absolutely.
So are you saying you didn't do it?
No, I didn't. I made the phone call. I did the time.
That was the only question I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's the only question, and that was only directed by one person, and so we will move on to Miss Melody Howard. Miss Howard.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Apparently this race has quite a few candidates in it. Mayor Hafen mentioned a vortex in the city of Henderson where it's very difficult to get through this vortex. I would like to know what ideas you have to get through cutting some of the red tape to get businesses going, or if you have any other ideas or suggestions to streamline the government in the city of Henderson.
Since this is to the entire panel, we're going to move down, and this will start with Mr. Kyler Robinson.
Well, just to start with a really short story, the other day I was talking to a gentleman that was putting up a sign in Henderson for somebody, a small business, and I got talking to him, and he had put up signs both in California and in Henderson, and he said, you know what, I have not had more paperwork in anywhere that I've done business, and even in California, and that's pretty sad, because when you're talking California, I mean, as many of you know, there's many regulations and rules that they have down there. The paperwork, I can imagine, is ridiculous. To cut the red tape, I think the local government does have a lot to do with that. I mean, a lot of this stuff, I mean, obviously we do have to take into consideration public safety, but I think that should be very minimal to the point of maintaining, that safety. Other than that, I believe that local government should just get out of people's way, to be honest. My parents own a small business, and I know how that goes. So I work for that business as well on Friday. So.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Workman.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. I'm not sure what the mayor meant by vortex. I don't watch that show. But basically, there are two things that I'm aware of for small businesses that are not very friendly to them. A lot of small businesses, most if not all, have to have fire inspections. I believe it's quarterly. It's a deal where they have to pay a significant amount of money for some private fire inspector to come out and look at things. They look at things and then they go. They send them a bill. If the alarm goes off as it's supposed to, then they get their certificate. But that's done frequently. It seems to be very costly and a lot of pressure, not pressure, but excessive. Also, business licenses. We need to increase the amount of time that a particular business license is good. We have a part of Henderson and the city government that monitors that, and they should do just that, just monitor it. And another thing, I understand Amazon.com wanted to come into town, and they only had 15 employees they're going to put here, and they were dissuaded by the city from coming into town. And we need to not dissuade Amazon.com or kick out Zappos.
Thank you, Mr. Workman. Mr. Sculla.
Yeah, I agree that there's more we need to do and be more proactive with the small business owners. They're vested. They're a part of the community. They live there. They work there. They raise their children there. The big box stores, they're great, but they're not vested. They can pack up and move out at any time. And I think, really, especially with Water Street, we need to really take a good look at it and bring it back to where, that's the entrance to our city, and it's a ghost town, it's sad.
Thank you, Mr. Sculla. Mr. Sikora.
We have the greatest entrepreneurial country in the history of the universe and world. And this vortex, as the mayor speaks to, is nothing compared to the entrepreneurial spirit. We have a huge gorilla in the room that we're not recognizing, and that is shipping jobs overseas. So we have so many few businesses competing for the same amount of business. We need to look at that issue before we look at the regulations. I can't imagine that a intelligent, hardworking, entrepreneurial company can't blaze right through the paperwork part of it. We have huge issues here with the cronyism, of course, and I'm not blaming Andy for this, but we have the circle situation where somebody retires and then goes into government, and then his
Thank you very much, Mr. Sikora. Is that all, Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Then we'll go on to Mr. Lauer, Mr. Rob Lauer.
Back to the business issue, because that's obviously critical here in the state, and especially with the city. There are cities in other states right now that only charge $1 for city licenses for new businesses as a startup. Would you support something like that for the first year, letting them get going instead of having to come out of pocket thousands of dollars to start a new business when that's a critical time when most businesses fail in the first 2 years? Why not charge $1 for a business license the first year? Would you support that and all the way through? And any other ideas you may have for helping businesses encourage them to come?
May I, since it's to the complete panel, to be fair, we're going to start with Mr. Workman.
I would definitely support a $1 business license fee for the first year, maybe for 2. As you said, a lot of people are struggling just to put a few dollars together to begin a small business. Big businesses often start from small business, and we need to do everything we can to keep from dissuading them, and we need to give them a chance, give them a fighting chance. So absolutely, $1. And probably only $1 because we might have to have some kind of a monetary transaction for a contract, and that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Scala?
I agree, yes, $1 would be the number for new businesses, especially in the downtown area, absolutely. I've watched, just in my section, I've watched 3 businesses come and go just in the last 8 months. It was because of code compliance issues. They just couldn't get there. They couldn't get there, they just didn't have the resource. And it's, it's unfair. I mean, I think they may have survived if they hadn't been, just hammered to death with these code compliance issues.
Thank you, Mr. Scala. Mr. Sakura?
We have a zero-sum game here. We have to raise so much revenue. I live in Sun City Anthem. There are 5 sushi bars between 215 and 3.5 miles up the road. There are 4 Chinese restaurants and 5 Vietnamese restaurants. We need to look at creating jobs in the 30%. We have plenty of restaurants here. We have plenty of barbershops and hair salons. We need more manufacturing. I think I have ideas to create more manufacturing jobs here in Henderson as well as the Las Vegas Basin.
Do you support the $1 license fee?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Sakura. Mr. Robbins?
Just to answer your question, first off, yes, I would support that, and it's kind of funny that you do mention that because I had been thinking, like I mentioned earlier, my parents own a small business as well, and the city of Henderson, they charge you a certain amount of money every 6 months. In some other cities, like the city of Las Vegas, it's only once a year, and in fact, it's about half of what we pay with the city of Henderson. And in fact, what I was thinking about doing is just actually not even charging them $1. Why don't we just say, hey, you know what, for your first year, we're going to basically waive all of this stuff, help you guys get started so that you actually have a chance, because like a small business owner, half the time you don't even really know what to do or what's required, to get your business going, to get that started. So.
Thank you very much. Is that all, Mr. Lauer? Mr. Forrest Darby?
Hello? Hello? I just have a statement. I want to thank all of you for coming in, thoughtful answers. Your race honestly reminds me of the Dina Titus race that just finished. You must know the odds, and yet you come in and you speak to us and you give us thoughtful answers, and I want to thank you for that.
Okay, Mr. Darby. We'll go on to Mr. Travis Barrick.
I'll pass, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Richard Churchio.
Thank you all for coming in. Appreciate this. I went through this a couple of years ago, so I know just how difficult it is to have questions thrown at you, and I promise I won't do that. It's not trying to throw you a curve. But we've heard a lot of hot button topics over here, and rightfully so: salary structure, unions, business, the economy. Excuse me, whether it applies to North Las Vegas, Henderson, or the Valley in general. But being on council, and all of the answers that you've been giving are very thoughtful, like Mr. Forrest said. But there are certain constraints on council that no matter how much good intentions you have a city manager, council form of government. You have one vote, which is equal to the other council persons. And how familiar are you with the rules and regulations that would either help you or hinder you from accomplishing the things that you're saying right now? I guess I'm asking you, what is your background experience in city government to give you some idea of how you would be able to accomplish your goals once you actually get that? And the second question, if we have time, if you're familiar with the term home rule. Do you support home rule for Henderson? Do you think it would be helpful or not helpful?
Okay, since this is to everyone, we'll now start with Mr. Joe Scala.
My thoughts just went right out the window. I've always been a competitive builder. Everything I do is competitive. And the city's never been competitive. I've never been a city employee. I've never had that luxury. If I ran my business the way the city runs and spends our tax dollars, I would have been bankrupt a long time ago. So my answer is, quite frankly, it has to be looked at like a business. And as a leader, you're right, it's 1 in 5, but if you respect your leader, generally you follow a strong leader. And the second part of your question, I'm not familiar with that, so.
That was a question on home rule.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with home rule.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sikora.
My experience in city government, I was the senior vice president of a major real estate advisor to pension funds, including the Nevada PERS, 47 such pension funds. I've been across this country and have purchased many major malls and warehouses and shopping centers and office buildings. And I know how a city works naturally because of that, having purchased $960 million worth of properties, some 64 properties. With respect to home rule, I'd like to have your definition of it because, of course, home rule in England and home rule in each city has a slightly different connotation. But if you mean by home rule that, like the allocation for the school...
10 seconds, sir. You got 10 seconds.
Allocation of the school district funds for outlying districts versus the cities, of course, you're going to have some of that allocation because it's funded by the state and the federal government.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robinson.
I'm not familiar with home rule. I'd have to look into that. As for being, I guess, one of the 5 on the city council as mayor, you're right. It would be difficult to get things done, especially when you have some opposition. It kind of really troubles me when Andy Haven, speaking about Kathleen Vermillion and her, I guess, her debacle with them. I believe it was on you guys' radio show about her going in there with certain expectations to change things and do stuff. And I do realize that there is a lot to get through, but I do know that my plan would be to help them realize, you know, kind of get past the, I guess, the political side of things. I think many of them have probably been in positions where they can't relate to small business.
Thank you very much. Mr. Workman.
Yes, as far as the issue with the city manager and the one mayor, the mayor and city council are responsible to hire, of course, the city manager, and it's incumbent on that group, including the mayor, to ensure the city manager is aware of the mission, goals, and values of the city, and ensure that he understands them. And then basically, once you hire a qualified candidate or keep a qualified candidate for a city manager, let that person do their job. Back off and watch and ensure things go smoothly. If there needs to be some changes, just like a parent would do, you come back and get them on the right path, then back off and let that person continue on. One thing that the city mayor is responsible for is as a spokesperson during an emergency management type situation. One thing that we need to do with that is concentrate on the public safety so that the city mayor does have all the tools required. And that means putting the PD and the fire department back into the same, under the same jurisdiction, under the same assistance of the manager.
Thank you very much. Now, as moderator, I'm going to interject a little bit. If we could have Mr. Churchio please define home rule and then just a quick answer, I think that would be appropriate.
Well, from the perspective of municipality being on council, a lot of the decisions are taken out of the hands of local government and put with the state. We don't have the ability to make many decisions that affect our own community at the local level. Thus the term home rule. So I apologize if I didn't explain it. It wasn't trying to lead you into an answer that you didn't know.
Okay, so we'll start again with Mr. Scala, since it's the same question. If you could just simply respond to that and whether or not you approve of home rule.
My home, my castle, my community, the same thing. We should be able to take care of ourselves and be responsible to ourselves. And it shouldn't be the state, forcing their wishes down on us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sakura?
Home rule is a nice phrase, and of course, we live in a federation. We have taxes coming back from the government, from the state, from the county, and so for all purposes, we do not have complete home rule, but I think Henderson has not suffered from that situation as compared to Pahrump and some of these other outlying areas.
Mr. Robinson?
Thanks for the definition, by the way. That was sometimes I'm not up with the technicalities. I am rather young, but yes, I would support that the local government have that power to do that. I believe it was intended to be that way. That way the local government is responsible to their citizens for decisions that they make that affect their own community. And as a state, I do believe that there are certain general things that should be followed, but I believe, a lot of that stuff should be left to the local government.
Thank you very much. Mr. Workman?
No need to apologize. You're doing fine.
Mr. Workman?
Yes, just as the federal government should be shrunk so that we can manage our own things, the state government should we should be able to do locally everything we possibly can as long as we are able to protect and safeguard and take care of ourselves economically. So anything that the local government is able to do, we should be able to do that and increase that capability, taking it away from the state.
Thank you very much. Is that all, Mr. Churchio? Okay, we'll now move on to Mr. Byron Brooks of the two Brooks family members.
Here's my question, and if there isn't a fundamental difference, then it's okay, you can say so. But what I'd be interested in knowing is, what are your differences between you and the incumbent mayor in terms specifically of public safety and economic growth for the city of Henderson?
Okay, let's start with Mr. Sakura, please.
I have differences with Andy Hafen. I think he's been a good mayor. I think that the differences and I don't know his exact feelings, but we have to look at this defined contribution and defined benefit situation, and I realize that is an extremely sensitive issues with the unions, but 20 years ago, most private industries went to a 401k type retirement. My good friend and John Oseguera played by all of the rules, and he was a fine retired fireman at 50 years old. But I don't believe $320,000 as Steve Sebelius and John Ralston printed in their article about this situation between defined benefit and defined contribution. We also have to do one other thing, and that is in Sun City Anthem, every time there's a 911 call, a
Thank you, Mr.
paramedic
Segura.
and a
Thank you,
huge
Mr.
fire truck comes
Mr.
up.
Segura, I'm sorry. I love you, I really do, but we have to keep to the rules, okay? Mr. Robinson.
I would say one of the main things that sets me apart from Andy is that Andy believes that government is the solution. I believe that they're the problem, to put it simply. To be more specific than that, I don't know how I could be.
Thank you very much. Mr. Workman.
Yes, thanks for the question. As far as the difference between the current mayor and myself, and in regard particularly to public safety, I alluded to before, I have a lot of experience in public safety, 19 years in this valley, and also as far as emergency management, which is a big part of that. But and I had the 20 years of military service. We need to concentrate more on public safety. They divided the duties about a year or so ago and put the fire department and the police department under two different bosses. Then we have emergency management, planning and management underneath the fire department. We need to, in order to enhance public safety and ensure they can have additional cooperation and coordination, put them under one public safety assistant city manager so that they can all speak the same thing and we can consolidate resources and not make mistakes. And then as far as economic development, I'll quickly mention something about the land deal that is something we need to take a look at and ensure we're not having the Chinese government or Chinese financiers buy our land.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scholar.
I'm a go-to guy. I've always been self-employed. I don't let work come to me. I go and I find it. I create it. We need to do that in Henderson. We can't wait for it to come to us. We have to go and get it. Safety is paramount. It always will be. But at the same time, it should be controlled. I mean, you just don't spend money that you don't have. So, you know, as far as public safety, yes, paramount. And the difference between me and Andy is I'm a go-to guy. I'll go out and I'll find it. I'm not going to let it and wait for it to come to us.
Thank you, Mr. Scholar. Is that all, Mr. Brooks?
That's it, thank you.
Okay. Now, is it Andres?
Andre.
Andre. You got the S on there, and
Yeah,
so,
they put it.
all right, but it's Haynes because that's S. That S you say, the other one you don't say.
Right.
Oh, got it,
Yeah.
okay. All right. Mr. Andre Haynes.
All right. I'd like to, this question is going to be for everyone. I'm going to direct it to Mr. Scala first. Wanted to congratulate you and applaud you for paying your debt to society. And with that being said, regarding the situation with Henderson Police Sergeant Brett Seacatz, who was involved in the incident where he kicked the diabetic and the family received around $300,000 settlement, do you believe that the police and other public elected officials are being held accountable? And if not, how would you hold them accountable? And I'll pose this to everyone, but starting with yourself.
As it's been said, the mayor is one of five, but the mayor is he's the leader, he's the figurehead. And I think had I been in that unfortunate position, I definitely would have dealt with it differently. You know, the police officers, they have a difficult job. And over the course of, you know, doing that job year after year, they change. They're not the same guys they were. They change, and it affects them. But at the same time, you need to hold them accountable. So I don't believe it was handled properly. I think, you know, to my knowledge, nothing's ever even happened to that sergeant. He's still on duty. So, no, he shouldn't be on duty.
Thank you, Mr. Scholar. Mr. Secor.
Police are doing a great job in Henderson. I've seen Camden. I've seen Detroit. They have an incredible job because we live in such an idyllic city and yet it can explode from some deranged kind of person. So you cannot automatically condemn this policeman. The policemen have a huge problem in the sense that the punishment to fit the crime. We have young kids serving 5, 10 years in jail for small amounts of controlled substances, and yet we've got a guy like Bernie Madoff living in a country club. The punishment is not fitting the crime, and we must look at this from a societal point of view to solve this huge problem between policemen and our citizens.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
Can I get you to kind of repeat that for a minute there? I know
Yes,
it was about the police
that's
officer.
okay. It was basically about accountability. Sergeant
Okay.
Seacats from Henderson Police Department had kicked a man who was having a diabetic seizure in the head, and the family of that man was awarded around $300,000. So I wanted to know if you, in terms of accountability, would you hold police officers and elected officials accountable, and if so, how?
Absolutely. I believe that, when somebody's entrusted with that kind of power to uphold the laws or be an elected official to make decisions for its citizens, I think they should be held to a very high standard. I think that the way that I would probably hold those elected officials and those police officers accountable is probably, and in this situation particularly, I think that officers sometimes fail to recognize that, a situation has really put them in some kind of imminent danger. And unfortunately, I think that, this was something that could have been prevented. My uncle is a police officer in another state and had a similar situation happen where a gentleman had pulled a shotgun on him and 4 other fellow officers. Needless to say, he was the only one that didn't fire a shot, and it was because he recognized that the situation hadn't escalated to the point of taking somebody's life. I think we tend to try and, jump the gun.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Work.
Yes, I'm pretty familiar. I worked with the Henderson PD and have been for 12 years. First of all, I will say as far as accountability, my understanding is that the mayor and city council members were briefed for several times prior to the surprise about the lawsuit. I do not believe, I know Chief Chambers, former Chief Chambers. I worked with her when she was a lieutenant and I was an administrator. She and I did not always get along, we got along. We didn't always agree though, however. But in this case, I do not believe that the mayor and city council should have fired her for this incident. We actually had the ICMA study. That was a $80,000 study that was funded by the city, where a group of retired and other experienced officers came in and evaluated the city. It was about a 6-month process. The end result that they briefed about 2 weeks ago was that they would not change the use of force procedures and policies that we have in place. We have to go back and look at the process and improve the process. And other than that, there is still litigation pending, and I cannot discuss
Thank you
anymore.
very much. Okay. I'd like to do a follow-up as the moderator, but we're running short on time. If we have time, I'd like to come back to this, if that's okay. Mr. Haynes, are you finished?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Jason Brooks.
Thank you. Gentlemen, again, thank you for being here and let us berate you with some of these questions. One of the questions I'm going to have for you as far as Henderson is concerned, I live in Henderson as well. Everybody talks about, and everybody agrees that you should be a fiscal conservative when it comes to running government. Everybody who runs always says, I'm a fiscal conservative, I'm a fiscal conservative. What are you going to do if you get elected mayor? What are you going to do to actually be able to have the funds to increase the things like public safety, like you want to? You're talking about a fire chief who gets $520,000 last year with benefits, sick pay, leave, whatever. $520,000 just for one person within the city. Now, what are you going to do to be able to work your budget to where you can hire more public service members, but without having bloated salaries, and be able to bring yourself back down to the budget? So it's for each of you to answer that individually. What are you going to bring to the table that's going to make a difference?
Okay, I believe it's Mr. Sikora's turn to go first.
One thing I wouldn't do is kick the can down the road for the huge unfunded liability for defined benefit retirement. This is completely closing our eyes against what can happen in the future. I own a home with my wife and I own another home in New Jersey in a adult community. Our taxes for a similar kind of home is $5,600. Here in Henderson, it's $1,200. And that's because New Jersey is 300 years old and Henderson is 53 years old. So we are looking at the trees instead of the forest because we've got huge liabilities facing us if we don't start looking at these issues right now. $500,000 for a police chief, for a fire chief is, for a town of this size, sounds staggering to me. And I would certainly look into that. And of course, it's a huge battle with the unions. And I believe we have two huge forces here, and we're kind of the puppets in between. And of course, it's the union leaders.
Thank you very much, Mr.
And
thank you very much.
lobbyists.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson.
I agree with Jerry here. I've done a lot of research on the debt load that the city has acquired over the years. I believe currently they have about $277 million in, debt obligations and bond obligations that, when you're talking fiscal conservative, that's who I am. My household, just to kind of give you an idea, we live off of about $1,500 a month, and I support 3 kids on that, and I pay a mortgage. I usually don't mess around with that kind of stuff. I think those bond obligations have to be paid off. I believe the city's become irresponsible. They're planning, 3 new parks this year, when frankly they don't really have the money for it when they have, such a high bond obligation debt load. And that's one of the things that does have to be taken care of, because this year alone, they're going to be spending about $10 million in interest payments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Workman.
In regard to fiscal conservation, we have an immediate need. There are things that we can do right now to save costs. And a lot of times people talk about saving money. Well, when we are inefficiently using employees, we're spending money. A lot of people seem to forget that it doesn't have to be the greenback to be spending money. Those resources, personnel resources, are huge. Now, we pay consultants occasionally to go out and to come in and do things. We pay them top dollar. But yeah, we have a lot of employees throughout the city, huge numbers of employees who have a lot of skills that are not being used. We need to empower our employees. They can do a lot of things. There's a saying, do more with less. We can do more with the same. And we don't have to cut employees, as long as if we're going to cut somebody, make sure it's because they're not doing their job. We're increasing the VESP. It's a buyout program that's now, I think, in the 4th cycle coming around. It was intended to only be used one time. But we're getting rid of some of the more experienced people, and we're getting new people who aren't experienced, and that costs money to train them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scala.
I agree with everybody here. Basically, we didn't create the monster. The monster's in place. I'm a firm believer that salaries should be capped. Some of the salaries that are being paid in Henderson are nothing short of criminal. You've got guys down there that are making, we are so far above the national average. It isn't funny, it's ridiculous. If I ran my company, like I said earlier, the way they run this city, I'd be in jail. I'd be bankrupt. You just can't do it. You have to put a cap on it. You have to re-examine it, and that has to start immediately.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That completes our panel discussion. Yes, sir.
Now you get to come back around. Didn't you ask for a follow-up?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a follow-up then?
No, you did.
Well, I did, except the fact that we have 2 minutes until our next segment.
Right.
And so we do not have.
You got cheated.
Yeah. Well, I can say that.
You're not the moderator.
My statement was that part of the problem with that officer kicking the diabetic coma person in the head is the fact that it took the police over a year to conduct their investigation, which put them outside of the statute of limitations for anything for the city that could have done. So when the district attorney decided that a felony wasn't committed, which I can respect that, statute of limitations had already expired. which is a year and a day for misdemeanor crimes. Therefore, it was taken completely out of the hands of the city of Henderson. I don't understand why that investigation took over a year. It just happened to go right past the statute of limitations when they submitted to the DA. Kind of a funny thing. So, that was my question and my frustration with that issue. So, anyway, thank you very much. Is there
30 seconds.
30 seconds to wrap up among all the candidates? I believe it is Mr. Robinson or Workman's turn to go first?
Robinson.
Mr. Robinson, will you please go first? 30-second wrap up.
I just want to thank you guys for, sorry, my throat's a little dry. Thank you for letting me come out here. Thanks for the tough questions. It puts me on the spot. I really enjoy kind of making my mind work a little bit there. I want to just say that, you know, I had a difficult decision in making, you know, this run for mayor. I do know Andy Hafen personally. I do understand what he is about. I do understand him as a person. I think I can make a difference in Henderson. I know it will be difficult.
Thank you very much. Mr. Work.
Yes, first, thank you all very much for doing this for us. You're not doing anything to us. It's great for the community. We need a change. 26 years in city government in one spot, just changing chairs is too long. We need some innovation. We need to initiate, and we need to look internally, and we need to make big improvements very fast in the city of Henderson, and it's possible with myself as mayor leading the council.
Thank you. Mr. Scholar.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm not a public speaker. I'm just an everyday guy that's always run my own company the old-fashioned way, calluses. I don't know if that'll work in city government, but I'm willing to try. I'm an old school guy with old school values, and I don't believe in being conservative. I believe in being competitive, so that's my spin.
Thank you. Mr. Sakura.
Thank you, and this race is about the primary. It's only 60 days long, which is ridiculous in the sense that if the 6 of us do not get 50% in one vote, Andy Hafen will not have to debate the issues. We'll continue to go around with Andy and all his good friends and $135,000 war chest that the RJ has reported that he's going to use. Will continue to perpetuate what you're talking about. We need somebody to step forward and
Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Win the primary.
I'm sorry, we got a good job, to be fair. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions to the panel and also to the candidates. And thank you also to the behind the scenes, the organizers and the people who put together the audio, video, and everything that's going on. So good job.